Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we talk about life, death and experiences in between. I'm Kirsty, the host of the show, and I trust that the conversations within this podcast will offer value, insight and information into what happens in the afterlife. To find out more about the free online community and extra content, be sure to click subscribe and to check out the links in the notes below. And now, let's get into today's episode.
And from that perspective, when I was like 20 or 30 feet above my body, I could see that there was a train rapidly coming into the station. Always, all my life, I've always clearly remembered floating above the accident scene and watching, looking down below. At the same time, it was like I was transformed into a force field of love. All of a sudden, I feel like this force field of peace descend upon me.
Hello and welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Yvonne Kason. She's had 5 near-death experiences, most of which we covered in the part 1 of this conversation. So I highly recommend, if you haven't heard that, just jump back 1 episode to part 1 of my conversation with her, catch up on all of the good things that we've been talking about, and then join us here for part 2 of this conversation. I hope that you'll enjoy it and get loads out of it. Let's get into this episode.
And what I experienced then, it was like this. It was whoosh. It's like how they depict when a genie's being sucked into a bottle. That's how it felt to me. I'd been at this big, expansive place up above my body, and then suddenly, whoosh, it seemed like through the top of my head, I was like sucked in to the small confines, relatively small compared to how big I was up there, of my physical body. And then that is when I knew that in the divine drama that I was going to live. And I remember rubbing my hands against my, they were so frozen. I had zero feeling in them. I had no feeling in my hands at all, but I was like rubbing them against my legs in the hot water. And I was saying, I'm back, I'm going to live. And the nurses probably wrote in the chart, confused or something, but I wasn't confused at all. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I then knew that the ending to this movie or this TV show, if you want to look at it that way, was that I was meant to live and that I was meant to live on. So anyway, this experience impacted me profoundly. So I was a young doctor and I was finishing my residency. Fortunately, I had to take some time off to recover from my frostbite and from the water in my lungs. So I'm really glad, because just to integrate a little bit, to absorb the impact of what had happened to me. And I remember that it was like I had brought some of the love back with me. I was just like, it was like I was drunk with love when I came back. And I remember that I'd be sitting there and I'd be looking out my window and I'd see the squirrels playing on my lawn, and I'd feel these waves of love coming out of my heart for the squirrels, right? Or I'd see children down the street and they'd be riding their bicycles playing or whatever, and I'd feel these waves of love coming out of my heart for the children, or the birds singing in the trees, and like, oh, these waves of love. I was just oozing love. It's like literally like some of it came back with me. In music, oh my goodness, I could hardly listen to music without tears coming down my face, because I was just so filled with love and my heart was so open. And it was not all sort of ungrounded love. Also, the whole experience had a profound growing up effect on me. I was able to, in a loving but a very clear way, let go of some relationships that really were not serving me. That I just had the clarity to understand that I deserve to be treated with respect. and so that's a very powerful, positive psychological thing that happened to me. Another powerful, incredibly powerful, positive thing was that my relationship with my father was healed. Prior to this incident, you know how young people, you get into issues with your parents. Well, I'd been quarreling with my father, and, we'd not been talking, and our last few conversations had been quite sort of not unfriendly, to put it mildly. And we really were not on speaking terms with each other. And after this experience, I called up my father and I said, Dad, I love you. Let's be friends. And my father and I reconciled. And we had a beautiful father-daughter relationship, really loving father-daughter relationship for 7 years until he ultimately died. And I look at this as one of the biggest gifts that I got out of this near-death experience. And you see, it's not that my father changed. He was still the same as he was before. It was me that had changed. Those things that bugged me so much and were so important to me before just didn't matter anymore. They seemed trivial. They seemed irrelevant. What was important was the love that we shared. And so this was a really, really profound gift out of that near-death experience. Well, anyway, I went back to work after a period of time, recovering from the frostbite and integrating what was happening. And of course, as a young doctor, I was really interested to talk with the other doctors at the hospital where I worked to ask them, has anyone ever heard of something like this? I mean, do people even have a name? I didn't even have a word to describe what had happened to me. So I told my doctor friends about this. And I remember, my doctor friends and even some of the more senior doctors in the hospital, everyone wanted to hear what happened to me in the plane crash. So I told them. And, but everybody had a hallucination theory, that what it experienced to me, what I experienced was a hallucination brought on by a low blood sugar was one of the theories. And I'm going like, no, another one was a hallucination due to an electrolyte imbalance. It was like, no. And, all these hallucination theories totally did not resonate with me. And, so I basically stopped talking to doctors about it because it was just being dismissed and it was having such a powerful, positive impact on me. I knew this was not a hallucination. And then, much to my surprise, a few weeks after what I now know was a near-death experience, I had my first clairvoyant experience. I had a psychic awakening. So I started having clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient experiences. And this particular experience, I was driving to visit a friend of mine. I was stopped in an intersection in my car at a red light. And all of a sudden in my mind's eye popped this really clear visual image of my friend's brain covered in pus. Now, how I knew it was my friend's brain, I have no idea, but I knew it was my friend's brain. And the symbology to me as a medical doctor was totally clear. It was meningitis. And so I drove over to my friend's house. And when I got there, I sort of sheepishly said, gee, how are you feeling? And she told me that she was feeling really sick, that she had a bad headache. And yes, later on that day, she was admitted to hospital and diagnosed with a severe type of meningitis. Fortunately, she got appropriate treatment and recovered. But that was my first of many clairvoyant experiences. So all these things were happening to me as a young medical doctor, and I didn't know what they were. I actually went to see somebody in Toronto who said that they were an expert on near-death experiences. And I told this person about what had happened to me in the plane crash. And I said, now, is it possible that this is a type of near-death experience? And he said to me, well, did you see a tunnel with a light at the end of it? And I went, no. And he said, and were you clinically dead for a period of time? And I said, well, don't think so. Closest was unconscious, right? And he said, no, it is definitely not a near-death experience. Because, back in the 70s, they used to say you had to be clinically dead and then resuscitated in order for it to be a near-death experience. So here I was, I'd had something that they said was not a Kundalini awakening. Then I had something that was not a near-death experience. Now I'm starting to have psychic experiences. And as I searched to find a word for my experience in the plane crash, the best word I finally found was a mystical experience.
Right.
So for about 10 years, I actually called it the mystical experience that happened to me in the plane crash. But this is what got me as a young doctor to start researching the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences that people are having, that I wanted to understand what was happening to me. And it was only many years later, about 10 years later, when I'd done lots of my own reading and research on all these diverse experiences, that I personally came to the conclusion that NDE researchers who held that position were wrong, that you did not have to be dead in order to have a near-death experience, that you could also have it when you're facing death. And I had the opportunity to meet the eminent NDE researcher and co-founder of IANDS, Dr. Kenneth Ring, in 1990. So here I am, this young nobody from Canada, and I met Dr. Kenneth Ring, and I says, can I tell you a story? And I remember with my knees knocking, because so presumptuous of me, he's this really recognized, important researcher, that I'm saying, I think you're wrong. And so I told him, I said, I think the definition is wrong. I think you don't have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience. I think it can happen when you're facing death too. And Ken Ring, we've become very, very great friends. From that moment on, we were great friends. But he just burst out laughing and he said, Yvonne, you are absolutely correct. I've come to the same conclusion as well. That you do not have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience. Well, from that point on, and yes, yours was a near-death experience, Yvonne. So from that point on, I have been boldly saying yes, that was a near-death experience that I had in the plane crash in 1979. And it totally transformed my life. We don't have a lot of time left. So I'd like to tell you a bit about how it changed my life. Is that all right? Or would you like to hear about my other two NDEs? Maybe we'll do them on another occasion.
Well, maybe we need to get you back on. And I know that I know there'll be a lot of questions. I'm frantically writing things as we go here. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. There's so much scope in there and so many different things that sort of all bring it back to the same thing time and time again, which is just this beautiful spiritual, what you've called mystical experiences. So many times I'm thinking about you, and as you're talking, you're so good explaining. I'm literally in cartoon world, because that's how I think, looking at what you're explaining, and I'm seeing you swimming through this ice water with your boots on and your jacket on, your clothes, and I'm seeing the nurse hanging onto a piece of wood, and how you got there, the helicopter just happened to be there, all of these things that just happened to take place.
Yes.
I mean, it's out of this world. It's amazing.
Yeah,
but how does that play out in terms of when you come back and then you're sitting in the therapy pool and you're warming up and you're thinking, I'm back? What about, what sort of sense of purpose did that give you? And how do you kind of integrate everything that's going on, that divine appointment that you were supposed to live, that even though there's another thing you're going to get through that, and another thing you'll get through that, another thing, there'll be a helicopter there waiting to get you back there. All of these things that were taking place, do you feel that it was divinely done? Do you think that you have a very strong call for your life personally? What do you even do with all of that?
Yes and yes.
There's a lot of questions in that one question.
and all of the answers are yes. All of the answers are yes. So let me explain how this impacted me. it took me a long time, I would say over 10 years, almost 12 years, to really become clear what my purpose was, why I had gone through these experiences. So initially, it's like this, it launched me on a quest, on a personal quest. But I was leading like a double life. I was in the closet. So I ended up having my outer life where I was a medical doctor and I got a teaching position at the University of Toronto and I had an extremely successful medical career. That was my outer life, out of the closet. My in the closet life in my private time was I was a mystic and I was a spiritual seeker. And I was reading everything I could about mystical experiences, about Kundalini, about near-death experiences. I was meditating. I was reading scriptures from all different traditions. I studied with spiritual teachers from distant traditions. But it was like I was leading a double life, an in the closet life versus my outer life. But slowly they started like overlapping more and more because people heard about me via the grapevine. Oh, there's this doctor in Toronto you can go and see, and she's not going to automatically label you as crazy about your paranormal experiences. So more and more people started coming to see me in my medical practice and confiding in me and the confidentiality of my medical practice about their spiritual experiences, about their mystical experiences, about their Kundalini awakenings, about all sorts of psychic experiences, about after-death communications, about near-death experiences, all sorts of experience, past life recall. So I also was developing a strong, in medicine, we call it a clinical base, right? I had a lot of clinical experience now. I'd had a lot of people come to me as patients who were having these experiences. So I had this body of people, of cases who'd spoken to me, so many, were over the years. And I'd done all of this research for 10 years. Plus, I was continuing to have repeated STEs. So I was having personal experiences. So my understanding of this whole area was getting deeper and deeper. And then in 1990, at the same event where I met Dr. Kenneth Ring, the Spiritual Emergence Network and the Institute for Transpersonal Psychology in California held a conference on the topic of Kundalini. And I had, one of the things I didn't say is I traveled to India at one point and I met Gopi Krishna, who taught me about Kundalini, and he mentored me. So I've been considered an expert on Kundalini specifically. So I was asked to come and speak at this conference in terms of what I'd learned about Kundalini from Gopi Krishna. And this was all part of my, in the closet life. So while at that conference, I had a profound mystical experience, and I do share it in my book, Touched by the Light. I call it my calling mystical experience, where all of a sudden it was like the heavens opened, and where my head used to be became this ball of light, radiating light in all directions. Wow. And I could taste this amrita, like this nectar dripping down the rear of my throat. And in this state, I knew what I was being called to do.
The Let's Talk Near Death podcast is excited to be a co-sponsor of the upcoming Spiritual Awakenings International Conference. Taking place on June the 12th and 13th in 2021, this is a conference to bring us together as a global spiritual family. To find out more information about this conference and how you can get your ticket, pop along to spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. We look forward to connecting with you at the conference, but in the meantime, let's get back to listening to Dr. Yvonne Kason.
I was being called to come out of the closet, that I was now going to specialize my medical practice publicly in the counseling and research of the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences, that I was to go public with what had happened to me in that plane crash, that I had had a near-death experience, and I was to become an advocate for experiencers, that the medical profession and society was doing harm to experiencers by labeling them as crazy. And this is when I knew what my mission was.
And how did that make you feel? It sounds terrifying.
I was not afraid. I was clear. I knew this was why it had happened to me, is because I now can advocate for experiencers, because I am an experiencer, I am a doctor, and I have experience as a researcher, and I have talked with hundreds of people. So I have all the credentials now to be an advocate, to be on the front line. It's like, I look at it as Spirit was giving me my spiritual training while I was doing my medical training, you know, the medical school, and as a resident, a Kundalini awakening, and then my mystical near-death experience. And it all came together in 1990. And then I went to my department chairman when I got back from this conference in California. And I said, you know, if you want me to give up, because I had a full-time university teaching position, quite prestigious. And if you want me to resign, I will. But I've made up my mind. This is what I'm going to specialize my medical practice in. And I swear my guardian angels overshadowed my university department chair, because he listened to my story and he says, yes, this happened to you when you were a young doctor. And he says, Yvonne, you don't have to resign. As long as you're doing research, it's fine with me. And so fine.
Fabulous.
And so then he helped me. I launched a couple of years later, took a while to get it all organized, but I launched the Spiritual Emergence Research and Referral Clinic in Toronto. And I advertised for doctors to send me their patients who are having these experiences. And I was flooded. My practice was flooded, was popping. I had a waiting list of all the people who wanted to come and see me to talk about their experiences. And so that is what I did. And then I started writing books. Then I started lecturing. Then I got invited on TV shows and radio shows. I actually was sort of famous in Canada. And, I was the doctor that was doing near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences in Canada. And I was an experiencer. And so it was really, really clear that was my purpose. And then I have to say, I want to bring you from then to now, because that was in 1990 when I specialized my practice in being an advocate for experiencers and in counseling people with the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences. I was, in fact, invited to speak at IANDS in 1993, and I did. And I talked about Kundalini and near-death experiences, exploring the links. But for me, I felt at that time that IANDS was a bit of a shoe too small for me, because they were looking at the time just at near-death experiences. And in my mind, we had to look at the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences, near-death experiences only being one type of experience that people are having. And so that's why I went on and founded with others, the Kundalini Research Network in 1990. I became the Canadian coordinator of the Spiritual Emergence Network. Again, people having all types of spiritual experiences. And then I loved the work that I did, and I wrote 2 books on the topic. My last one before I died was Farther Shores, and all about the spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences. And then in November of 2003, November the 8th, 2003, I had a very serious slip and fall accident. I slipped on black ice, I hit my head, and I died. I had a serious traumatic brain injury. And that is where I had my most recent near-death experience, which I'm just going to say very briefly, maybe if we do another interview, I can tell you about the one I had in 95 and the one in 2003. But in 2003, basically, I slipped and fell, had a serious traumatic brain injury, died, was whisked out of my body, was greeted into the light again by two beings of light this time that I absolutely recognized, two saints from my spiritual tradition, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, in their light bodies. And they telepathically communicated with me and informed me that I had died, that my work was complete in the body of Dr. Yvonne Kason. And it felt just such joy, just celebration, welcome, like a graduation party was being held in my honor. And I remember thinking, because I, researched a lot about near-death experiences to this point. Now we're going to have the life review, because I knew I'm not perfect. I am not perfect. So I thought, here it comes. And it was so incredibly beautiful because just with a glance, it was like they knew my thoughts. They knew my thoughts. They knew that was I was thinking. So they looked at me without even anything being said. They just I knew I understood that it didn't matter. That just like a mother understands when its young child is learning how to walk, it's going to stumble, it's going to fall, it's going to skin its knees, it's going to bump its head, that this is all part of the learning process, right? That was the understanding that I was given, that the divine, beloved Mother, Father, God understands, that we make these mistakes and that nothing to worry. It really, really, really didn't matter. And so I just was feeling incredible joy, incredible bliss, incredible love, incredible welcome. And then I went into a place or a state, it's hard to have the words to describe it, where I wasn't seeing things anymore, but it was like my consciousness had the capacity to take in a vast amount of information all at once, like a massive computer download. And I instantaneously remembered, so had no longer forgotten all of my past lives. And I had an aha experience because of the clarity. It all made sense to me now that my rather, I've always considered a little bit unusual life as Dr. Yvonne Kason, having all these NDEs, all these STEs, I can write books about it because I'm having all of them, right? That this is not my first incarnation having these types of experiences. I've had NDEs and STEs for many lifetimes. And so it was sort of like my soul was just picking up from where it had been before. And it all made sense to me in the context of my many past lives. And in that state of awareness or consciousness, or it's hard to even put words to describe what it was, but it was like time was passing differently and time was experienced differently. And it was as if past, present, and future all somehow coexisted, or you could see them all at the same time. It's very, very difficult to explain from how we experience time down here linearly, but time was experienced very, very differently. And it felt like the period of time that I was there on the other side was much, much, much longer than the period of time that passed here on the worldly frame. And then after a period of what I would call timeless time, the two beings of light, the saints, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, reappeared to me in their light bodies so I could see their light bodies again. And then they telepathically communicated to me, you may now choose. And translation means you must now choose, but it was you may now choose. and whether to incarnate into the body of a babe to further serve the divine, and or to go back to the maimed body. And interestingly enough, maimed was not a word I used at that point in my life. I actually had to look it up in the dictionary after I came back. Maimed means disabled or with a handicap, but I sort of got it that maimed meant there'd be problems. So that was the choice that I was given, you know, the babe and or the maimed body. And when I was given that choice, it literally felt like it was my heart that was responded. My heart was just so wide open. I was feeling ecstasy, bliss, joy, love, impossible to describe what I was feeling. And it was like my intellect was taking a siesta or something. You know, it was my soul that was responding out of my heart. It literally felt like the words came out of my heart. And what came out of my heart was, "Oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice?"
Wow, that's beautiful.
I want to do God's will.
Yeah.
And they so exquisitely, lovingly, telepathically communicated to me, like how a thought can be so exquisitely loving is impossible to describe, but it was just exquisitely, lovingly, telepathically communicated to me. It'll be more difficult, but to go back to the maimed body.
Yeah.
And, you know, my intellect did not pop in and go, "Well, what do you mean more difficult?" What exactly?
Yeah, hang on a minute.
No, it's like, I don't know. My intellect was off having a siesta over there. And my heart just totally accepted. My heart just totally trusted and wanted to do God's will, whatever is the higher choice. And so my heart instantly responded, "I accept." And it was faster than the speed of thought, because it was between the thought "I" and the thought "accept" is when, with a gasp of air, I suddenly opened my eyes and was starting to breathe life back into my body, which was dead or unconscious, lying on the pavement outdoors in winter. And it was like waking up in an ice cube. My body temperature dropped so much that it was like waking up in an ice cube. And at first, I could see both realms. It was like the white light realm was completely superimposed on our physical realm, like they were superimposed on each other. And I could see the two saints, the two beings of light right in front of me. It was like they had ushered me back into my body. And then what happened is, as I was continuing to breathe life back into my, I'm just going to say, previously dead body, that slowly the white light realm started fading until it just became like a little dot. And then I was, you know, mainly perceiving here. And I remember someone came running up to me, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And the first words that came out of my mouth were, "No."
Yep.
Wow. I had a serious traumatic brain injury with the brain hemorrhage and lacerated both of my frontal lobes. Anyway, this experience disabled me. So this happened November the 8th, 2003. I was disabled. I had to stop practicing medicine. I could no longer write books. I could no longer public speak. I could no longer counsel patients. It was like an atomic bomb hit my life, and it was completely flattened. Even my son had to do the driving of the car. And my intelligence was not injured, but I had other serious challenges from the traumatic brain injury. And this near-death experience was like a life ring for me in the storm, because life was incredibly challenging after the brain injury. You know, I went to neuro rehab for 7 years, you know, trying to get back to at least some of what I used to do. But I had to accept at a certain point that it just was not in the divine plan for me to heal. And so about 3 years after my injury, I officially retired from the practice of medicine. And I thought that type of in the world life was a chapter that was closed. And I felt very, very complete and very happy with what I had done before my head injury. But that for whatever reason in the divine plan, that that was not how I would serve anymore. And so what came to me is how I could serve with my disabilities was through my prayer and through my meditation. So I had lost the ability to meditate. I had to work very, very hard to get that back too. But so I focused very much on prayer and meditation, praying for other people. That's how I understood I could now serve, was through my prayers and meditations, because the other abilities had been taken away from me. But then you're wondering, how is it that you're here today? And how is it that you're president of Spiritual Awakenings International and past president of IANDS last year?
Exactly. How do you go from that point to
exactly.
where you are today?
That's what I have to tell you, is that a miracle happened. And this was on February 24th, 2016. I was on meditation retreat in Encinitas, California. I was deep in meditation. And suddenly I had this eruption of light in the center of my brain. I could see it inwardly, this eruption of light. And I had a miracle. I had a spontaneous brain healing experience, and my brain was healed. And it was, the sensation was like waking up. It was literally like the center of my brain had been asleep for 12 years. This was 12 years since I'd had the brain injury, and it woke up. And it was literally like the lights came on. It had been in darkness, and now with this flood of light, the lights came on, and my brain was healed, rewired by God's divine plan, however the good Lord wants me to be. One of my friends lovingly says, I was taken offline for 12 years for refurbishment.
Oh, I love it. Yep.
And I came back as Yvonne version 2.0. So, well, Yvonne version 2.0, here I am.
Yeah.
And so immediately after the healing experience, I started writing again. So this book, Touched by the Light, it is the first book I wrote after my brain healing. The message that I got with my healing, you asked about mission, the message that I got with my healing was, pass on what you have learned.
Yeah.
And so that is what I'm doing now. I am passing on what I have learned. And, when I wrote my book, I knew I'd have to start public speaking again, or else nobody'd know I'm back from the dead to read my book. The first place that invited me to speak was IANDS in, I believe it was 2017. So I went to IANDS. I spoke. I thought, oh my goodness, Lord, have you healed my ability to speak? Because I didn't know if people would walk out of the room because of whatever. But I got a standing ovation, and I went, well, Lord, looks like you've healed my ability to speak too. So, and then later on in 2017, I get invited, I believe it was 2018 now, 2018, IANDS invited me to serve on their board of directors. And so I went, well, Lord, is this part of what you want me to do now too, is to serve on volunteer boards? And I got, yes, so, okay. So I started serving on the IANDS board, and then guess what? I was elected president. And I thought, Lord, really? You want me to be IANDS president? Yep. So I became IANDS president in 2019. But then in 2020, it was very clear to me that Spirit was calling me in another direction. So with great love and affection, I resigned as president of IANDS, and I've now co-founded with Robert Baer Spiritual Awakenings International, which is to raise awareness and promote networking internationally about the whole spectrum of spiritually transformative experiences that I've been really doing my entire career for the last 40 years. And near-death experiences, yes, they are one of the experiences people are having. I've had 5 of them, but guess what? I've also had clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, Kundalini, past life recall. You can list a whole bunch more, inspired creativity. So this is how it all came together. And Spiritual Awakenings International was birthed because of a call from Spirit. And Robert Baer and I, like Robert Baer and we were president and vice president of IANDS, and he's also a multiple NDE experiencer. And we met each other through IANDS, but we instantly recognized each other, that we'd known each other from past lives. And he's highly intuitive and I'm highly intuitive. Mm-hmm. And in one of our first conversations, one of our first phone conversations, he said, Yvonne, I'm getting a download from Spirit that you and I someday are going to start a different organization that's looking at the whole spectrum of STEs. So this was back in 2019. Wow. And I said, oh, let me meditate on that. So I meditated on it, got my own download, which was, yes, you and Robert are going to be starting an organization one day. And the name for your organization is going to be Spiritual Awakenings International. So, I call up Robert. Oh, my goodness. We're being told one day we're going to found Spiritual Awakenings International. But we were, going to be president of IANDS. So we thought, okay, whenever that's over, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, we're going to do Spiritual Awakenings International. But that wasn't God's timing. So we were both really clearly shown when it was time, that with love and deep respect, that we were going to move on to pursue a different venture. And so we co-founded Spiritual Awakenings International in June of 2020, and it has just skyrocketed. Your podcast being one of the affiliated groups, we have like 35 affiliated groups and networks from all around the world. We are in 55 countries from around the world. We have subscribers from every continent except Antarctica. We're still waiting for the penguins. But it's been amazing. That the enthusiasm, I think it's no coincidence, and I'll wrap up with this, Kirsty, but is that I think it's no coincidence that Spiritual Awakenings International was born during the pandemic.
Yes, interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that was divine timing, and that people are going through spiritual awakenings. I mean, people are having near-death experiences because of COVID. I've had 2 people tell me detailed near-death experiences they've had during COVID. And I think in general, the whole world now, everyone's online. We're much more online. So this is the perfect time to create an organization that's an online network. So God knows all these things. It wasn't my plan. It's like Robert and I followed the divine calling when we were told it's now time to launch Spiritual Awakenings International. And we are just delighted to be providing a space where people can learn more about STEs, to provide a safe haven for experiencers where they can feel this is where you belong, this is where you fit, this is where you're normal. To be having paranormal experiences is normal in Spiritual Awakenings International. And so if anyone listening is interested in being a subscriber, our website is www.spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. And we have a featured speaker every month. Once a month. And Kirsty's going to be our featured speaker in October. We can't wait until that event. And so it's just wonderful that Spirit has given me a new mission for Yvonne version 2.0 is I'm passing on what I have learned, and this time doing it what fits in the 2020s, which is online.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I do encourage anybody listening to this to go and check out what Yvonne and Robert and the team are doing there. We're going to include all the links. Yvonne, I'm going to let people know when I'm there in October as well. But you've got your conference coming up. So we are going to share all of these details so that people can find you and get the support that they need. We've covered so many topics, so many topics, and I'm so excited by that. I do think we need to get you back because my questions are not yet answered. There is just so much goodness in your journey, in your personal stories. So thank you, Yvonne Kason. There's definitely an element which flows through for me. It's very clear, the element of the divine guiding, divine appointment, divine hand, all of these times that you could have died, starting from when you're very young in front of the train, things that happened, it was just one thing after another, which is amazing. And then even when you're told, I can't remember your exact words, but you said something along the lines of your body has completed what it needs to, that you got given the choice. Do you come back or stay? Do you go into the body of this new baby? Do you come back into your body now? Even through that, to come back into a body that has issues, you've got a brain injury, you're going through mobility treatment, you've got 12 years of, I guess, chronic issues.
Disability,
Disability, yes. Through that, still there can be a miraculous divine moment which changes everything, gets you back on track. Well, staying on track, I suppose it's not really getting you back, but into this place where your work today is helping so many people and making such an impact and such a difference. So, Yvonne, thank you so much for sharing everything.
Oh, you're very welcome.
This has been amazing. I love that you've shared this with us. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I look forward to connecting with you again soon. And yes, we will let everybody know about what your organization is up to.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. It's been wonderful sharing with you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near-Death podcast. Don't forget you can join the free online community over at www.letstalkneardeath.com, and I look forward to sharing another episode with you soon.